Okay. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Emily Sweeney. I'm a reporter at the Boston Globe, and I used to be I served as president of the New England SPJ chapter for quite a few years. I'm here with Dave Wedge, and we're going to talk about your new book about Whitey Bulger. I don't know if you have a copy of it you can show on the screen or.
I do. It's under my laptop stand. Here it is.
All right.
Very
Great book.
Very proud of this one. Casey and I worked really hard on it. It was quite a project to be a part of, and I'm really excited about it. So I'm excited to do this. You know, I love all the stuff that the organization does. When I was at the Herald, I was involved with SPJ, and I think it's so important, especially now. So thank you guys, Adam and everybody in the organization for doing things like this. It's very meaningful.
No, totally.
Yeah.
And the book is great. I have I've got the digital Kindle edition of it, and you guys did an amazing job, I gotta say.
Thank you.
You know,
it means a lot coming from you.
Seriously, I mean, one of the things that struck me was, you guys getting an interview with Billy Bulger. I don't know if you could maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So, the people that don't know me on this event, thanks everyone for joining. But, I was a reporter at the Boston Herald for 14 years. I left in 2013, and I used to compete with Emily on some stories from time to time. And it was always a friendly competition. And I'm kind of an old school journalist. I came up in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, unfortunately, before internet, before cell phones. I just kind of learned how to report the old fashioned way, which is going and knocking on doors and digging through court records physically. And that's, as my career progressed, I obviously adapted with the times, and, I used all the newer tools and all the tools that are what every journalist uses today, your phone and so on and so forth. But I've always kept that sort of old school sentiment, and it's been very good to me in my career. And certainly with this book, it was, I went and knocked on Billy Bulger's door a few times throughout the writing process of this book. And lo and behold, one day he was home, and, he knew me, he knows who I am. I had covered him a little bit when he was at the State House, and over the years, he had known me from some of the different stories I've written, and I quoted him and stuff over the years. So he, I was expecting to have the door slammed in my face, as we all us journalists here know that happens quite often, but he didn't. He said, "Hello, David, how are you?" And I told him, I'm working on this book and like to talk to you about your brother. And he welcomed me into the house and took out my recorder and did an interview. I sat in his kitchen with him and his wife for about an hour and a half. And, it's funny. She act not funny, but it's just a few weeks ago. And it's, it's a little weird. I actually listened to the tape the other day, and she's on the tape. So, but it was, he, as you know, Emily, he's very cagey, chooses his words. He's a politician still to this day, 87 years old. He wasn't letting down his guard. He wouldn't go anywhere near the questions about, what he knew about his brother's life on the run or anything like that. But he did give us some insight into their childhood and why he thinks his brother was the way he was. And, a lot of that's in the book. And also he talked a lot about his brother's murder in prison, which was some of the most compelling stuff I think that he talked to me about was, obviously the family's suing now, so there's a vested interest there. But, they do make a good point that, it was not the right place to put him. And no matter what you think about Whitey Bulger or the crimes he committed, in a civilized society, we don't put people in prisons to get murdered. We're supposed to, the job of the jail is to make sure that there's peace. And, so I think there are questions to be answered there.
Yeah, that was something that, struck me, when I'm trying to wrap my head around how, he was even allowed to be transferred.
Me too.
And his medical record had to be, he had to be upgraded.
So, without spoiling the whole, narrative, what I can tell people is that there's still a lot of unanswered questions. There is an active investigation. We're told, we have some federal sources that tell us that they're looking at everything top to bottom, not just the guys who did it. And I think that's good, and I'm hoping that's why it's taking so long, is because they want to put the puzzle together and hold people accountable. Our investigation, that the best I can describe, and again, without ruining the whole book, is that the two wardens have a lot of questions to answer. The warden down in Florida, Lockett, I believe was his name, was the one who changed his medical designation. So the prison system has 4 different medical classifications based on your health. 1 is normal, 2 is like mild health problems, 3 is need some care, and 4 is you're barely, you need round the clock care pretty much. He was a level 4. Because he was on a respirator from time to time. He was in a wheelchair. He was 89 years old, and he saw the nurse every day. He was on all sorts of medications. He had a bunch of heart attacks, and he should have been in a medical facility at that point in his life. But he was having some difficulties with one of the nurses. The warden didn't like it, and he changed his medical designation. He lowered him to a level 3, and that allowed him to be transferred. And the Bureau of Prisons signed off on that. No one questioned it. And then what happened next was he was moved to Hazleton, West Virginia, which is one of the worst prisons in America. Certainly not a place where an informant should be sent. We explain this in the book too. There's 3 prisons in the federal system where informants and pedophiles and high-risk inmates are generally sent. And it's Terre Haute, Indiana, it's Tucson, and Florida. Well, Whitey had already been to Tucson and Florida. He never went to Terre Haute. He could have gone there. He also could have gone to the federal penitentiary, the prison hospital in Oklahoma. That decision wasn't made. Instead, they put him in Hazleton, which is known as Misery Mountain because it's so violent and all that stuff. And it's filled with gang members and mobsters. It was an absolutely horrible place to put him.
Yeah, it amazes me that he was, not only transferred there, but also placed in, general population. Given his notoriety and obviously the other folks who were locked up there. I didn't even know you could have somebody in a wheelchair in general pop. You know what I mean? Like,
so he could walk and he would walk in the line, but he needed a wheel. He sat in a wheelchair all day because he couldn't stand around. Mm-hmm. But when he got there, actually, it's funny. They originally had him. When he showed up at the prison, he has a file, and they all when they're transferred, they carry their own paperwork. When you get there, the paperwork, they show it to him. His is very clear. It says informant, and OC, organized crime informant. It says it right on it in big red letters. And at that point, the lieutenant on duty makes a decision. Where does this guy go? I'm going to call the warden. That's what happened here at Hazleton. They originally had him scheduled or assigned to a cell on the 2nd floor, and he was actually going to be in a cell with Paul DiCollegiero, who is one of the men that has actually now been implicated in killing him. But because he was so unhealthy, he couldn't be on the 2nd tier, so they moved him down to the 1st tier, and they put him in with a black inmate, a guy from from Buffalo. And that's a bit unusual as well, because they generally assign inmates in the federal prison system by race. They don't mix race in the federal prison system. And for Whitey, it was probably really bad because he was a notorious racist. He was a very racist guy throughout his whole life, a lot of documentation on that. So he's brought in there so that the lieutenant looks at his stuff, calls the warden, says, "Warden, we have this guy, Whitey Bulger." They don't really know him. Some of them may have heard his name, but most of them he's just another criminal. And said, he's an organized crime informant, says high priority. What do you want to do with him? And he said, just put him in general pop. So the decision was made by the warrant. And the way it was explained to us for this book, and we get into it in those chapters, is that, that responsibility falls on the warden. The warden is the one that the buck stops with. And he could have said at any moment, like, whoa, let's put this guy somewhere else. And he never, either didn't do his homework or didn't care. And hopefully that's what the investigation will show, why he made that terrible, terrible decision.
Do you think there was any, there was like talk, well, I guess like rumors, like, was it some type of conspiracy or, you know what I mean? That, ended up, him dying in prison. Do you think there's any truth to that? Or do you think this is just like gross incompetence?
My, again, this is just my opinion, but from everything I know about it, I think it's gross incompetence and negligence, really, apathy to a degree, I don't think anyone from the FBI called and said, hey, let's kill Whitey Bulger so he doesn't spill all the secrets. Because at that point, the secrets have been spilled for the most part. Now, we do know that he did write some sort of manuscript, and we know that a family member has that. And there are people out there that say that that was something that, people in the FBI and other organizations were worried about. I don't see how much worse it could have gotten. I mean, all the guys that were involved in that corruption have either died or been brought to justice for the most part, So I don't really buy that there was some giant conspiracy, but I'm not a big conspiracy guy anyway. I think it was more, both wardens, I think, didn't do their jobs. Do I think maybe one of the wardens knew someone in the FBI that hated Whitey Bulger and said, if you ever get a chance, stick it to that guy? Yeah, that could have happened. Maybe that happened. Maybe they had some sort of bias, but I think it's more of a kind of they just didn't care and didn't pay attention, didn't do their jobs.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, it's, I know Bulger wrote a lot from prison. Did you guys use letters that he wrote, and did they contain any surprises? Did you find it? Were you personally surprised by anything that Bulger wrote in some of these personal letters?
Yeah. So I think one thing a lot of people ask us, what do we need to know? What don't we know about Whitey Bulger, and why do we need to read this book? People always ask that. So much has been written about him, but with this book, a couple things. One, we got unprecedented access to the FBI and their hunt for him, and we kind of break down how the whole manhunt and capture happened. I think in more detail than has been done before. I also think that we got a lot of great detail about his life on the run through interviews we conducted, but also through these letters. But most importantly, I think that, we have more firsthand information from Whitey himself than has ever been in any book yet. And that's through all these letters that you're talking about. So we got over 70 letters from a couple of different people. One was an inmate that he served time with in Tucson. He was actually his prison art teacher. And that guy's name is Chip Janis. And Whitey was a big fan of Native American art. And Chip Janis, that's what he did. He taught Native American art in the prison. So when Whitey was moved to Florida from Tucson, he wrote a lot of letters to Chip Janis, and Chip shared those with us. So I think the biggest surprise and one of the big reveals in the book is that Bulger was stabbed in the head when he was in Tucson. There was an attempt on his life. And we got that from the letters from Chip Janis, and, we were able to corroborate that happened. So that's one surprise. Also, something that was really amazing was he had some pictures of Bulger behind bars in Tucson. So we actually, in the book, have the last known pictures of Whitey Bulger alive other than his arrest photo. He's in the prison with the art teacher posing with a bunch of gang members. So that's kind of interesting stuff. And then we also got a hold of a letter that he wrote to an Alcatraz historian, a guy named Michael Esslinger that I've built a relationship with over the years. And Michael's written a lot about Alcatraz, and he's communicated directly with Whitey for many years because Whitey loved Alcatraz. He considered it his Harvard, and he loved Michael Esslinger's books about Alcatraz and the history, and he wanted to be a part of that history. So he would have these long, involved letters with Esslinger, and Esslinger was kind enough to share one of those with us. And it was Whitey explaining and laying out in excruciating detail his own arrest. And that's in the book, and it's really compelling stuff.
Yeah, I always found it interesting that Bulger talked so fondly of his years at Alcatraz,
Yeah.
Looking back as if it was like almost talking about like a favorite vacation almost.
He did, yeah, he did. He considered it like his college, that was his alma mater, and in fact, when he was on the run, he went back there. We were able to confirm that. He also tried to track down some guys that he served time with in Alcatraz. One guy he tried to get a fake ID from, but the guy, ironically, had gone straight and actually worked for the Parks Department and gave tours of Alcatraz. And this guy was like a counterfeiter back in the old days, and Whitey tried to track him down to get a fake ID, but that was a dead end for Bulger.
Seriously. Just going back, I mean, one thing, when Bulger was on the run, in my mind, I mean, I thought he'd never get caught, or, you know what I mean? Or that he would like turn up dead or something at some
Me
point.
too.
Were you surprised when he was finally caught and to find out that he was kind of hiding in plain sight?
Yeah, I was shocked. I mean, I remember the day like it was yesterday. I was in the newsroom when it happened, and I thought it was a joke, because everyone,
Yeah.
we all joked about it. But after, hey, the big joke in the newsroom, I'm sure it was the same at the Globe, was like, keep your phone on in case you catch Whitey Bulger. It was always
Right.
that. That was always like the big fish that was waiting to be caught. And then it freaking happened, and everyone was like, holy crap, he's alive. They got him. Like, I thought it was a mistaken identity or something, or I couldn't believe it. I figured that he would have turned up dead or just never been found, and it would have been a mystery forever. But I'm actually glad they found him, because I think it does, people throw around the word closure, but, the families will never have closure because of what he did to their relatives. But I think for the city and all the people that have followed it, this closure, because, and that's part of the reason we wrote this book, was to let people know the end of the story. I mean, this is something that impacted Boston and really New England for over 40 years. Impacted a lot of lives. A lot of young kids' lives were destroyed by the stuff that Whitey did, and I think people have a right to know the end of the story. So I'm glad he was caught. I was surprised with Santa Monica, though. It's weird.
Yeah. Well, I guess it is by the ocean, kind of similar to Selfie in a way, slightly.
Yeah.
What do you think about Bulger? What qualities about him made him so successful, would you say? In the criminal world.
I mean, I think that, he ruled through fear, and intimidation, obviously. He was just, but it's weird because he wasn't like this, he wasn't like Jack Nicholson in Departed, where he would put a bullet in the back of your head while you were eating your spaghetti, you know what I mean? Or he didn't, I just think that his reputation preceded him. So he kind of became the myth that everybody believed he was. And he was just very, honestly, he was a very smart businessman. And if he had decided to go into business or politics or something else, he probably would have been very successful, because he had a very strategic mind. And I think he was very strategic in the alliances that he built, obviously with the FBI. I mean, that was I think, you talk about his personality. I think it was more what moves did he make to allow him to succeed. And that was the key one. He got the FBI to really protect him and give him carte blanche. So on one hand, he's wiping out people that are his competition, and he's filling the void. So I think he just was a very strategic dude. He was also a bit of a psycho too, though. I mean, he was an abusive guy. I mean, I think some of the crazy stuff from the trial that, you're well aware of, but, he helped kill people or put people in a place to be killed, watched them get killed, to help bury, whatever he did some nasty stuff, and then took a nap, and told the guys clean it up. Like that's serial killer stuff,
What do you think about, his relationship with Steve Fleming? Because obviously Fleming was an informant as well. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so they were thick as thieves, no pun intended or pun intended, whatever. But I mean, they were the people that we talked to. We went pretty deep on this. We talked to most people that were alive that could be gotten to, and several people talked to us. One of them being Pat Nee, who was one of the Winter Hill guys, and he described that relationship as almost weird because they were so close. He said that they were really, inseparable. He said that they were together constantly, to the point where some people thought it was more than just a friendship. Now, no one ever confirmed anything beyond that, but that, that's probably just gang talk, like jealousy or whatever. But they were together all the time. They killed people together. They traveled together. They ran the rackets together. They, took trips together. So, and, they met. The other thing that's weird is, to me, it's always been weird that it was hidden so long that they were informants, because they both knew that the other one was an informant because they met with the FBI together. several times. In fact, it was Flemmy that told him, talk to Whitey. He was the informant first. And then, we looked through, I read through all those reports that, I mean, they're out there if people want to read them. All the journalists on this call can, if they're interested, they can go to the federal court and request those and look through them. And it's really in depth, the conversations they had with the FBI going back to the 60s. And it was regularly, and it wasn't just with John Connolly. It was with, 10, 15 different agents, supervisors, all of it. And they were, just telling tales constantly, spinning stories.
What do you think Bulger's argument that he was adamant to, saying that he wasn't a rat?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's just bravado. And, Jay Carney, his lawyer, likes to push that out there that he wasn't an informant. He didn't hurt women. Well, both of those things are not true. He was clearly an informant. It's well documented. He likes to, and Whitey liked to portray himself as this guy who was, playing the FBI, and he was buying information, but he wasn't giving anything. But read the reports. They're all there. He gave lots of stuff. I mean, you ask Freddie Weichel if Whitey Bulger gave any information. Freddie Weichel served 36 years in jail for a murder he didn't commit because of information that Whitey provided to the feds.
When Bulger was on the run, and I mean, he was on the run for so long and successfully, staying one step ahead of law enforcement. What was his lifestyle like? Obviously you've probably seen the photos of his apartment in Santa Monica. And do you think there's like money hidden still around, like post office boxes around the world?
Yeah, absolutely. That's no question. One thing that you asked earlier, what surprised you, is surprising to me that the FBI hasn't gone after some of that money a little harder, because some of the agents we talk to think that they should, because they firmly believe it's out there. The problem is Catherine Gregg's never going to talk. She's never going to say where it is. If she knows, she may not know where the money outside the country would be, but certainly, someone like Kevin Weeks or even maybe John Martirano or Steve Flemmy would know where some of it might be, but maybe they'll never give it up either. But there is money out there. The FBI agents we talked to said it's, they believe there's millions, 10, 15, 20 million. What happened with this case that's very interesting is a lot of people think that Bulger was preparing to leave the country at some point, and that's why, he took trips to Italy and London. I think they did get some money from a safety deposit box in London at one point. But then 9/11 happened while he was on the run. Once 9/11 happened, Bulger could no longer come and go from the country because the borders were closed pretty much, and his IDs were good enough to get away with little crap around the U.S., but they wouldn't be good to travel internationally. He'd get caught. So he never left the country once, really ever, we're pretty sure. His lifestyle was, they just kind of portrayed themselves as two elderly retirees, tourists. And I think one of the best parts of the book is Louisiana with the Gautreaux family down in Grand Isle, Louisiana. And, we talked to that family at length, and their son, Bruiser, who had never talked before. And he, talked about Whitey like an uncle, and talked about how close they became, and he bought him groceries and took him under his wing kind of, and talked about staying in school and all that sort of, like kind of like a mentor sort of figure. And when they finally found out who they were after Whitey and Catherine left, they couldn't believe it. And the Santa Monica stuff too, they flew under the radar there, but he didn't live, while he had $822,000 in cash and all sorts of guns in that apartment, he did not live an opulent lifestyle. They lived a very humble, quiet lifestyle. He was really a prisoner in his own prison that he built for himself. He never really left that apartment much. They'd go for walks occasionally, but he was really paranoid about getting caught.
Yeah, understandably so.
Yeah.
One of the old school, myths of Bulger was that he was kind of like a Robin Hood type figure, in his neighborhood of South Boston. Doing research and stuff. Did you find any truth to that?
Well, I mean, Yes and no. I mean, he definitely gave back to his community a lot, but it was a way of buying silence and loyalty. So there was always an ulterior motive with him. It was never because he was a good guy. He wasn't trying to uplift Southie. One thing that he was famous for doing was, you know, guys would go away that, may or may not have been connected to his gang or crimes that may or may not have been something that he was involved in. They'd go away and Whitey would either feel bad about it or want to keep by their silence or keep them loyal to him. He'd go to he'd put money in their canteen, or he'd give in their prison canteen, or he'd give money to the family. And so he could always say to them, well, I took care of you while you were away. I took care of you. So they always owed him something. So everyone always owed him something. There was other things where, like, little old ladies in the neighborhood, he's very kind to, and, buy him groceries, talk to him, make sure that, the electric bill was paid, all that stuff, but a lot of times, those older people would also provide him information about what different people were doing in the neighborhood. So none of it was out of the goodness of his heart. And then most notoriously, is the drugs, that was just complete fabrication. It was really like, Will McDonough and, Mike Barnacle tried to push that myth that he kept the drugs out of Selfie, and nothing could have been further from the truth. I mean, they were the biggest cocaine dealers in New England, and that's all, again, well documented, so.
Yeah.
It always bothered me that, because in addition to the, to the murders, anyone who's grown up around here knows the havoc that, cocaine and heroin wreaked on South Boston, especially in the 80s and the 90s. We had all those suicides in the 90s. There was a rash of suicides, and a lot of those drugs came from Bulger and his crew, and a lot of guys became addicts. A lot of families lost sons and daughters, and so I just think that's a myth that I don't know why anyone would ever try to push that out there.
Yeah. Well, I saw one letter from Bulger where he was writing to a friend and talking about how much Southie had changed. And that's one thing I could totally agree with them on.
Yep.
It's probably be unrecognizable to him, today. So.
Well, yeah, it's funny. We actually have a scene in the book where when he was flying back from Santa Monica with the federal marshals, he was chattering as usual. The guy never shut up. That's one thing that surprised me too. He talked to everybody, like the prison guards we talked to. They're like, yeah, the guy never shut up. He's constantly talking. But he was in the plane coming back with the federal marshals, and when they were flying into Logan, flying over Southie, he looked down and asked him, he's like, where are we going? What? He didn't even he literally didn't recognize Southie because the seaport was a big wasteland when he left. Yeah. And now there's all those glass towers and all that stuff. So he definitely returned to a place that he didn't recognize.
During his trial, obviously everybody was getting all excited and, and hopeful that he would testify. Mm. I mean, were you surprised that he didn't? I mean,
I was, and we talked to the federal prosecutors length for this book, and they thought that it was just the ultimate courtroom theatrics. It was just another broken promise by Bulger, another example of him not being the noble gangster and being a fraud. He had every chance to take the stand and set the record straight. In fact, in Jay Carney's openings, he promised that Bulger was going to blow the lid off the FBI. And, everyone took that to mean he's going to take the stand and say where all the bodies are buried. And at the end, he didn't, and he kind of hid behind a technicality for not taking the stand, claimed that, the judge didn't allow him to advance his defense. But it was again, just more broken promises by a dishonest person,
And what do you think of his, he said that he was pretty much granted almost like immunity from Jeremiah O'Sullivan. Do you think there's any, obviously we can't ask O'Sullivan now, but do you think there was any truth to that? Or, I mean,
I don't, and again, the way, and I don't mean to sound like a cop or a prosecutor, but there's no way that anyone would have the authority to grant that sort of blanket immunity. And Bulger claimed that Jeremiah O'Sullivan made this devil's deal with him and said, you feed me information on the mob and you can do whatever you want. But there was no written agreement. There was no, O'Sullivan never told anyone about that, or if he did, that person never did a report. There was no record of it at all. So it was really just Bulger's lawyers saying that because Bulger told him that. And like you said, Jeremiah O'Sullivan is dead. But even if Jeremiah O'Sullivan did agree to that, and Bulger's telling the truth, it would have been unenforceable under the law. That O'Sullivan, even being the U.S. attorney, did not have the authority to grant that level of immunity. And even if he did, he didn't follow the proper procedure in doing it. So it was an unenforceable agreement. My personal opinion is that, they probably talked and it was probably like an informal thing, like, yeah, keep giving me some information, we'll keep the heat off you. I think it was probably that sort of thing, which was kind of common back then,
Mm-hmm.
But I've never worked in those kind of environments, so I don't know, I don't know if a deal like that would ever be openly discussed or not. But that was the defense that he tried to advance, and the judge struck it down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know a lot of journalists will be watching this episode. Can you talk? I thought when I first heard you and Casey were writing this book, I was like, oh, I was psyched. I was looking forward to it. And I was also thinking like, wow, that's a tough assignment because, you know what I mean? So much has been written about Bulger before. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys were able to dig up so much new stuff and how you reported on it?
Yeah. So, again, I mean, anyone that knows me or has followed my career, I'll speak for me and then I'll talk about me and Casey together. But, I think I always dot all my I's and cross all my T's, or at least I try to. And I try to do the work, and I try to always make that last phone call and always make that last door knock to try to make sure I give everyone their chance to have their say and get the story right. So, but it was definitely a tall order. But I think, if you look at the books Casey and I have written, whether it was, the Deflategate book we did in 2018 or, oops, I'm sorry about that. Sorry about that. Or the, we wrote the Pete Frady story, and then we did obviously Boston Strong about the marathon bombings. I think that if you read our books, we're pretty good at uncovering things that no one else knows and telling the stories about these stories that people haven't heard yet. And that's a journalist's job in general. And, I've been a journalist since I was 22 years old. So this is what I do. And, it was definitely a tall order. I was nervous too. It's funny you say that because when we actually signed the deal and started working, I was like, all right, how do we start this monster? But I kind of just went old school, like I said, and I started calling, I went deep into my Rolodex to people I haven't talked to in 15, 20 years, from way back in my early days at the Herald. And funny, a lot of people reached out to us. Our phone started ringing because people knew that, Whitey was dead. There was going to be an opportunity to, finish the story and have their say. So like a lot of people spoke to us, I think, that perhaps wouldn't have if Whitey had not been murdered,
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And I know it's still, I can still remember, hearing, number one, when Bulger was caught and apprehended, and then when he died to go out the way that he did. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, he got severely beaten.
Yeah. So,
and with nobody stepping in.
well, it's funny again, and this is, some of the, some of the reporting on what happened to him was sloppy, and some of it was just not accurate,
Mm-hmm.
from what we found.
Okay.
And, he was not, they didn't try to cut his eyes out. They didn't try to cut his tongue out. There was, some reports out there that they tried to castrate him. Like none of that happened. In fact, there were reports that he was beaten in his wheelchair and then rolled into a corner. The truth is he never woke up. He never got out of bed that day. He went into his cell at 10:30 at night and went to bed. And those cell doors open automatically for breakfast at like 5:30 or something like that. When those cell doors open, his roommate, his cellmate, that black guy from Buffalo I mentioned before, his name's escaping me right now, I apologize, but he went to breakfast and left. And the two guys that killed him went into the cell. Whitey never woke up. and they had the padlocks and the socks, and they violently beat him to death. The investigation we did revealed that it didn't take long. It wasn't a long beating. He was 89 years old. They would only have to, and remember, he had multiple heart attacks. So, 7 or 8 hits with those things, and an 89-year-old man's going to be dead. He never got out of the bed. They left him there in the bed, and then when his cellmate came back from breakfast, he actually cleaned up the cell, saw all the blood, cleaned it up, cleaned up the towels, wrapped them all up, put them in a trash bag, and put it out with the trash. And the trash came around at 8 o'clock that morning. Every morning at 8 a.m. they collect the trash, and that trash was taken away with all that evidence, and it was burned in the incinerator, and it's never been found. So that's why that guy was actually jammed up for a while too. So him, Paul DiCollegiero, and Freddie Gias, and another guy, I think it was Freddie Gias' cellmate, kid that was doing some time from Montpelier, Vermont, a gun dealer, all were put into solitary confinement after the murder. And to this day, no one's been charged, but DiCollegiero and Gias are still in solitary. That guy from Buffalo is actually out. He was released.
Okay. So
he's out of jail. The kid from Montpelier is still locked up, but I'm not sure if he's in solitary or not. But so Freddie Gias, he's a book to himself, by the way. He was an enforcer for the mafia out in Springfield and was doing time for orchestrating a hit on the head of the Springfield mafia, a guy named Alfredo Big Al Bruno. And Freddie Gias was not Italian, so he couldn't be made. He was kind of like Henry Hill. He was a Greek guy, so he could never be made, but he did all the dirty work for the mob out there in Springfield. And he's been writing to us. He's written to us several letters. We've written back and forth, and his daughter actually collaborated with us on this book and gave us a lot of information about their family and that stuff. So, you asked earlier what surprised you. I was surprised to get a letter from the guy that killed Billy Bulger, allegedly.
Yeah.
So again, he was cagey too. He wouldn't talk directly about what happened, whether or not he was involved, but he drops little hints, and there's things in the book that people will catch on to.
Gotcha. Is there any chance that they could get charged? I mean, maybe when the investigation's wrapped up?
Yeah, so the wheels of justice with prison murders are notoriously slow. No one's going anywhere. They're all doing life anyway. Both those guys, DiCollegiero and Freddie Gias, are both doing life. So my understanding from talking to, attorneys and prosecutors and things like that is that sometimes they'll just never adjudicate it. They'll just let it sit, let them sit in solitary for a long time. And then, eventually people forget with a lot of these cases. But where it's Whitey Bulger, I think they will have to finish it at some point, because you can't just leave a case like that unsolved forever. Yeah. So I think there will be some sort of report at some point. And, I would think that they would have to charge somebody, but it hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm. We had a question from Adam Sennett here asking, was there anybody that you were hoping to talk to in an interview for this book and were unable to?
Catherine, Catherine Gregg.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, we were able to talk to Catherine's twin sister, Margaret McCusker. We talked to Billy Bulger, obviously, the federal prosecutors. The other one was, Bulger's attorney, Jay Carney, didn't want to talk to us for the book. That was a little disappointing. So we had to just kind of go from the record with that stuff. But, I'll tell you, it was a little weird and unsettling to sit down with a guy like Pat Nee, and, he had a lot of stories, but he was an interesting interview. Would have liked to have talked to Weeks, but he didn't want to talk to us. And Materano we didn't go after because, he had already done a book with Howie Carr, so his story had kind of been out there. But other than that, I think, we kind of got to everyone that we wanted to get to.
We get another question. Did this book get you interested in any other prison murders or any others that you plan to cover in the future?
You broke up there. I'm sorry, Emily.
Sorry. We have another question from one of the viewers. Let's see. So did writing this book get you interested in any other prison murders, and do you plan to cover any in the future?
Well, I think you look. We're in this moment of reckoning with the police in our country, and I think that there's an extension of that has to go to the prison system. The prison system is certainly broken. What I've learned through my work in my years with the Herald, and it's only built with this book, is that like I said, the justice system within the prison system is really broken, and I'm actually shocked. The way that they can just kind of violate civil rights of inmates. Here's an example. Freddie Gius wrote us several letters and expressed in those letters he wants us to come visit him. We were trying to get that visit. We sent the letters to the prison, said, look, he wants to see us. He has a right to. He's still constitutionally protected, but they just said no. And they can basically say that based on security issues or ongoing investigations, which is what this is. So that was upsetting. But in answer to the question, I mean, I've always had an interest in, giving a voice to the voiceless, and no one has less of a voice than prisoners. And I've written a lot of stories over the years. Gary Sampson, the serial killer, he wrote me some letters when I was at the Boston Herald, and I reported on those. And I do think as journalists, it's important to reach out to inmates and get their voices heard when you can, as long as you vet out the information.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think a lot of people, they're kind of forgotten. You know what I mean?
And I think a good look at the justice system has to include how are we handling our prisoners. Are we punishing them? Are we reforming them? Are we locking them up and throwing away the key? I mean, some people would say, good, I want that. But, from my experience and all that I've read about justice and reforming people, harsh prison isn't going to make society a better place. It's going to make it a worse place.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm not saying we should give them, luxury housing and wine and cheese, but I definitely think that the prisoners need to be treated with dignity and respect, because that will hopefully help a majority of them find their way back from the dark side. At least I like to think that,
Yeah, it's the hope. My colleague Adam Sennett has another question. He says, he's read that Whitey liked to collect books about from his former cohorts. Did you learn anything about what he thought of them? And do you think he liked the legend of Whitey Bulger?
That's a great question, Adam. We did get some insight into that in some of the letters that he had. One was, he talked quite a bit in a couple of letters we had about Moderano. And he was really mad that Moderano I think he got $100,000 for that book he did with Whitey, with Howie Carr. And he in one of the letters, I wish I had it in front of me, Casey's got it, but he said something along the lines of, I'm sitting in here and everyone else is out there cutting deals and getting paid. So he was definitely aware of what was going on. He was not happy about it. And he was definitely aware of his own legend. I mean, one other moment that I love in our book is one of the letters he says that his plan was, if he was going to throw himself down a mine shaft and die so that he would never be found. And my reading of that is that he wanted to perpetuate that mystery and that, kind of Amelia Earhart sort of eternal mystery, whatever happened to Whitey Bulger. I think he wanted that. And then obviously most telling was, he talked to us about Brad Pitt. He talked in the letters, I feel like that's weird. It's like he was speaking to me, but we read the letters and you read enough of them and you're like, it's kind of weird, but he talked in one of the letters about Brad Pitt wanting to meet with him. I'm sorry, Johnny Depp for Black Mass. Mm-hmm. And he didn't want to meet with him because he didn't want to participate in that project because he didn't like the book. He thought the book was filled with lies. And as you know, he did not like your colleague and my friend, Kevin Cullen, very much, for good reason. And Kevin did his job. And so that was kind of funny that he was definitely aware of that stuff for sure. And at one point he talked too about, I think either Affleck or Damon wanted to meet him, and he said no, he didn't want to meet with him.
Do you foresee this book becoming a movie or any other Whitey movies on the
So yes,
horizon?
we have partnered with a production company called
Nice.
Double Nickel, and they have the rights to this book, and we're developing it with them as a limited series. And we hope to have some pretty big news on that soon. It's really kind of moving fast, and this production company, they're the ones that made the movie Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood,
Mhm.
and they've done a lot of TV, and so we have a great writer that's on board that's done a bunch of stuff for HBO, and we've got a director that we're hopefully close to locking up. So we're hopeful, and it would really be, it would be like the book. It's not the story of the FBI corruption and what happened in 1980 and who pulled out whose teeth and all that. It's a story about a gangster and his girlfriend on the run for 16 years as old people, trying to stay free. And, we'll tell some of that old story, gangster stories through their eyes, but it'll really be a story about a couple on the run and how they were caught and that sort of thing. So we think it's got a fresh perspective, and we think it's going to be good if we can get it made.
That's great.
Yeah,
And speaking of, another person had a question. Do you think Catherine will ever talk, or do you foresee a book about her ever coming out?
I would have said yes before I dug into this book, but her attorney, Kevin Reddington, is an old friend of mine. He was pretty clear that she'll never talk, never, ever, 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 and I now, having talked to enough people for this book, I believe that she won't ever tell her story. Watch, I'll open up the Globe tomorrow and she'll be on the front page breaking her silence. But, I'll tell you what, if she talks to anyone, it probably would be Shelley, So I hope she does tell her story someday. But I personally don't think she will. I think she just wants to move on with her life,
Yeah. We're wrapping up. Is there anything else that you'd want to talk about, or do you have any, events coming up, related to the book?
Well, unfortunately, no, because of COVID. But I'm thankful for these sort of forums especially this one, to talk to my fellow writers and journalists like yourself. And I guess to get on my soapbox, I think that during this time, we all need to take our jobs really, really seriously. And whatever the topic is, just really work hard and get it right, because we're all of us journalists are on the chopping block right now, and we're all fighting for our own credibility, and we're fighting all this disinformation. And the worst thing we can do is give someone a reason to make us look worse. So, that's my spiel. And I hope that things get better with this sort of dialogue with regards to the media. And I think, all of us doing our jobs well will help us get there. So.
Yeah, I hear that.
But yeah, people can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Dave Wedge, and that's where I kind of post most of the stuff, the events we have. We're hoping that we'll be able to have some events in the fall, maybe when things get a little better, but we'll see.
Yeah. Knock on wood. Hopefully.
Virtual book signings. I'm doing a lot of socially distanced signings. Someone will get a book and I'll go meet them somewhere and sign it. And, it is nice to get out and talk to people one-on-one like that. But it's nice to do events too, as you know.
No, totally. Well, hopefully they'll be happening soon. And I hope everybody enjoyed this. Thank you for all the questions. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. And Dave, thanks for taking the time to talk about the book.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thanks for doing it, Emily. Thanks, SPJ.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.